What if I told you that the greatest danger to humanity isn't a lack of intelligence, but a silent, collective mental contamination capable of transforming brilliant minds into accomplices of destruction? Imagine this: an award-winning scientist spreading lies, a beloved teacher supporting hate speech, a loving father putting his own children at risk, not out of malice, but out of stupidity. Not the stupidity you're thinking of, but an invisible force that turns brilliant minds into puppets of the system. It was precisely this that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran theologian, witnessed in Nazi Germany. He didn't see monsters. He saw neighbors, colleagues, and spiritual leaders become instruments of evil through functional stupidity. And the most disturbing part is, it's not happening to others. It's happening to people like you and me right now. It's such a disturbing, precise theory that understanding it could mean the difference between maintaining your mental freedom or becoming just another piece in the game of those who profit from your alienation. When we think of stupidity, we tend to imagine someone with low intellectual ability, a caricature of blatant ignorance. But that image is a comforting disguise. The stupidity that truly threatens freedom is subtler, more insidious, and above all, collective. It doesn't reside only in individuals. It installs itself in systems. It manifests in standardized behaviors, unquestioned truths, rules people follow without knowing why, but follow nonetheless. This level of stupidity is not a personal flaw, it is a sociological force. It acts like a virus, spreading silently through culture, education, and institutions. Once internalized, it transforms common sense into an invisible prison. People stop thinking, not because they can't, but because they no longer have to. Society thinks for them. Normal becomes the compass. Acceptable becomes moral. Everyone does it becomes justification. Most terrifying of all, this stupidity is functional. It serves to maintain order, stability, and above all, power. Those who question too much are dangerous. Thinking too much slows the system. The machinery requires obedient parts, not restless souls. This is how you create the ideal citizen for the interests of any regime, democratic, authoritarian, or corporate. Someone who consumes, votes, shares, and gets outraged, but only within permitted limits. Someone who believes that thinking is having an opinion, even if that opinion was planted in their head by an algorithm or a TV host. The result? A mass of individuals who believe themselves critical but are actually just reading from a script someone else wrote. A society in which stupidity is not the exception, it is the structure. And anyone trying to escape it is immediately labeled arrogant, conspiratorial, or too radical. But that's precisely where the danger lies. When stupidity is no longer seen as a flaw, but praised as a virtue, when questioning is considered aggressive, when thinking deeply is interpreted as elitism, this is how an entire generation is shaped that knows everything, except how to think for itself. In 1943, within a Nazi prison cell, a Lutheran theologian named Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a series of reflections that now feel almost prophetic. Imprisoned for conspiring against Hitler, Bonhoeffer no longer saw evil as the main danger of his time. What he saw was something far more devastating: stupidity as a morally active and socially accepted force. He observed educated, religious, well-intentioned people around him becoming accomplices to a murderous regime, not because they were malicious, but because they had lost the ability to judge. They obeyed, they believed, they repeated. And when anyone questioned them, it was those very people who pointed fingers, not the soldiers. He wrote, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of good than malice. Against malice we can protest, argue, and sometimes defend ourselves. But against stupidity we are defenseless." This wasn't rhetorical exaggeration. It was his diagnosis of a system in which thinking was outsourced, along with responsibility. Bonhoeffer witnessed professors defending Nazi doctrines, doctors doing inhuman experiments, citizens denouncing Jewish neighbors, not out of deliberate cruelty, but because they had become unconscious agents of the regime. They didn't kill. It was enough that they believed the killer's ideas. And worse, they were proud of it, because within the collective logic of the time, they believed they were doing what was right. Bonhoeffer's stupidity wasn't dumb, it was obedient. And when obedience allies with disabled intellect, the perfect scenario for totalitarianism emerges. That is the crucial point of his theory: stupidity as a moral choice, a surrender of individual conscience to the comfort of dominant narratives. A surrender that, once made, transforms anyone, no matter how intelligent, cultured, or sensitive, into a useful cog in a machine of destruction. Bonhoeffer was executed just weeks before the end of the war, but his theory survived, not as a warning about the past, but as a key to understanding the present. Because what he saw in 1943, Germany is still alive today. In ready-made speeches, outsourced thinking, in certainties no one dares to question. And the question he left us wasn't, "Are you good or evil?" It was, "Are you still thinking?" Bonhoeffer didn't just provide criticism, he provided a theory and perhaps a curse. Because once you grasp what he meant, you can never see the world the same way again. According to him, stupidity is not a cognitive failure, it is an ethical condition. A state in which a person no longer authors their own ideas, but instead acts according to external commands, while believing they act of their own free will. This isn't about IQ. It isn't about information access. It's about an internal willingness to think, and that willingness disappears when the individual trades critical judgment for belonging, security, or convenience. Bonhoeffer saw something devastating. In times of crisis, fear, and instability, human beings tend to seek shelter in systems promising order, and for that order to function, individual thinking must be anesthetized. From that moment arises the perfect citizen for any authoritarian system, obedient, convinced, incapable of perceiving that they are serving something they do not understand. This is the root of the theory. In this sense, stupidity is not passive. It is militant. The stupid person doesn't just believe, they defend, they repeat. They persecute those who think differently because they believe they are saving the world. They don't need proof. Authority is enough. And here's the most disturbing point. Intelligence is not a barrier to this condition. In fact, it often becomes a tool the stupid use to justify their beliefs. Elaborate rhetoric, biased references, selective logic. These can all be used in favor of an idea that has never truly been examined. This is the most dangerous kind of stupidity, the one with diplomas who speaks eloquently, garners likes, writes columns, but deep down doesn't think. They merely echo, and the louder the echo, the more convinced they become of their lucidity. Bonhoeffer was right to fear this force, because it transforms entire societies into fields of voluntary obedience, where those who dare to think are labeled mad, and those who follow blindly are considered virtuous. That's what makes this theory so unsettling. It points its finger not at the other, but at each one of us. Bonhoeffer's theory, born of ethical and historical observation, now finds support in the cutting edge of psychology and neuroscience. What he intuited in 1943, science now explains with unsettling precision. Let's start with the Dunning-Kruger effect, a symbolic example. According to this phenomenon, the less someone knows about a subject, the more confident they tend to be in their opinions. Ignorance breeds certainty. The incompetent are incapable of recognizing their own limitations, and that makes them vocal, proselytizing, and intolerant. But the explanation doesn't end there. Classic experiments on social conformity, like Solomon Asch's in the 1950s, show how peer pressure can lead individuals to deny even what their eyes see, just so they don't stand out. In the experiment, a group identified which of 3 lines matched the length of a reference line. The correct answer was obvious, but participants didn't know the others were deliberately giving wrong answers. The result? Over 70% of participants conformed at least once, choosing the incorrect line just to fit in. Solomon wrote, "The tendency to conform to the group's opinion is so strong that many prefer to err with others than to get it right alone." This experiment reveals an uncomfortable truth. The fear of being outside the group is stronger than the impulse to be right. The need to belong, not to stand out, not to appear weird, can lead intelligent people to abandon their own judgment. That is exactly what Bonhoeffer feared. Not stupidity as ignorance, but as active conformity. Add to this the confirmation bias, a cognitive flaw where people seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms their beliefs and ignore the rest. The internet is the paradise of that bias. Algorithms deliver exactly what the user wants to hear. The result is an infinite mirror of certainties, each person inside their own echo chamber, feeding their stupidity with personalized data. Even more recent studies in neuroscience show that when faced with information that challenges their beliefs, the brain reacts in the same areas that activate during physical pain. In other words, thinking differently literally hurts. That's why many prefer the comfortable simplicity of repetition over the demanding discomfort of reflection. These discoveries reveal what Bonhoeffer already feared. Stupidity is a predictable, programmable, and highly exploitable mode of human functioning. Power systems, advertising, propaganda, and technology have learned to use these mechanisms masterfully. The average citizen is not manipulated by chance. They are manipulated because they function that way. And the more they believe they are immune, the more vulnerable they become. Science confirms the fight against stupidity is not a war on ignorance, but a war on relinquishing thought, on the impulse to fit in, to follow, to simplify. Thinking is biologically costly, socially risky, psychologically painful. That's why it is so rare and so necessary. Another experiment confirming Bonhoeffer's intuitions is Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiment from 1961. Milgram wanted to understand how far an ordinary person would go when instructed by a legitimate authority, even if it meant causing pain to another person. The results were frightening. 65% of participants delivered potentially lethal electric shocks to another human being just because an authority figure told them to. They sweated, trembled, hesitated, but obeyed, even when the victim screamed and appeared unconscious. Milgram concluded, "The essence of obedience is that a person sees themselves as an instrument to carry out another's wishes, and therefore does not feel responsible for their actions." This experiment not only validates Bonhoeffer's theory, it stages it. It shows that ordinary people without sadistic traits are capable of collaborating with evil simply because they outsource their conscience, not because they are inherently worse than others, but because they stopped thinking. Most unsettling, the volunteers were neither fanatics nor monsters. They were ordinary citizens, teachers, housewives, engineers, people like you and me. Stupidity, therefore, isn't the absence of intelligence, it's the absence of active moral consciousness. It's following orders, trusting authorities, repeating narratives without judgment, and when that becomes the norm, any atrocity can be legitimized with lines like, "I was just following orders." Today's stupidity is not accidental. It's a product, even a design, and it is working perfectly. We live in the era of mass distraction. While you read this, companies, platforms, and algorithms are measuring your attention time, your emotions, your clicks, and in real time adjusting what you see, feel, and subtly believe. Modern stupidity no longer needs dictators. It has interface designers, content creators, and friendly influencers. It doesn't impose, it seduces. The logic is simple. The less you think, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you are, the more manipulable you are. And the more manipulable you are, the more profitable you are. This equation rules from social media feeds to political speeches packaged as slogans. The system doesn't want you to think, it wants you to react. Look at the algorithms of social platforms. They prioritize what generates emotional engagement, fear, anger, moral outrage, emotions that shut down analytical thinking and activate herd instinct. The result? Millions defend causes they don't understand, attack enemies who don't exist, take sides in conflicts they can't even explain. But it isn't just technology. The machine of stupidity also passes through education that teaches memorization, but not questioning. Through media that feigns plurality, but only varies the tone of the same narrative. Through culture that turns any dissent into hate speech. Through entertainment that trades complexity for instant stimulus. It's a system that rewards those who shout, but silences those who think, that idolizes opinion, but demonizes critical judgment, that transforms any attempt at deep analysis into elitism, arrogance, or lack of empathy. We are surrounded by a social engineering that promotes stupidity not as a failure, but as an ideal behavioral model. The distracted, polarized, reactive, and emotionally volatile citizen is the perfect consumer, the perfect voter, the perfect employee. And the question presses with the weight Bonhoeffer would surely endorse. How many of your ideas are still truly yours? In a world where superficiality is celebrated, doubt's silence becomes scandal, questioning becomes offense, and thinking becomes a radical act. Yes, radical, because true thinking requires courage. It's not enough to hold an opinion. You must dig until the opinion dissolves, until only harder questions remain. That scares people. It isolates them. It demands a price. True thinkers feel the discomfort of always being on the margins of consensus, the anguish of realizing most are wrong, and that you might be too, the loneliness of not fitting into any ideological box, of not having a cheer squad, of not receiving easy applause. But thinking in this time is also subversive, because it challenges the machine's logic, rejects the feed's speed, demands pause, silence, contemplation. All that the system hates, all that the market won't monetize, all that politics won't accommodate. And so those who think become seen as threats, as arrogant, difficult, unfit for reality, because thinking dismantles narratives, and narratives feed organized stupidity. There is something even more unsettling. Thinking today is not just hard, it's dangerous. Have you noticed how certain ideas can't even be mentioned without the crowd reacting as if it were a crime? Have you observed how the discourse of virtue has become the new tribunal, leaving no room for nuance, context, or ambiguity? We live in an era where the greatest heresy is thinking independently, where genuine thought has become transgression, where the pursuit of truth has been exchanged for social validation. And the cost of resisting is high. You will lose followers, be misunderstood, maybe even cancelled. You will be lonelier, more troubled, more uncomfortable, but also free, authentic, unbreakable, because when you reclaim your autonomy of thought, no one else can take it from you. Bonhoeffer from prison understood this. He knew thinking is dangerous, but also that not thinking is fatal. And now you know it too. You made it this far, just that places you outside the average, because this is not easy content. It offers no quick solutions, no external villain to hate. Instead, it points inward, to where the most effective stupidity often hides, in the comfort zone of your own mind. What Bonhoeffer left us was not just a warning, it was a choice. He showed that once stupidity takes hold, it needs no weapons, only silence, repetition, and unexamined good intentions from well-meaning people who become agents of evil because they stopped thinking for themselves. What remains for us is to resist, to think, to question, even when that makes us unpopular, especially when it does. Rescuing thought is no longer a virtue, it is a necessity, an act of intellectual survival. In this time, maintaining lucidity is an act of disobedience, and critical consciousness is the last free territory in a society that commercialized everything, even the mind. So the final question isn't whether you understood Bonhoeffer's theory, it's, are you willing to pay the price to remain lucid in a world that rewards stupidity? Now you know, and knowing carries a cost. But something more dangerous than paying that cost is pretending you didn't hear the call, going back to sleep under the illusion that you are still thinking. Waking up is uncomfortable, but remaining anesthetized is the real risk. Don't look away. Don't hide. Don't give back this awareness. You own it, and it may be all you have left.